we really want to be a partner of the health system and take care of them the best we can, right? And really be an extension of their team, because we know they're, limited on resources, they're limited on space, they're limited on time. And that's what our job is, to help with all that.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
This is Justin Poulin and Melanie Perry. Today on this Vendor Spotlight, we're going to be speaking with Curtis McIntyre, founder and CEO of Masry.com, and Ashley Jackson, who is the VP of Business Development. The conversation today is going to be all about asset recovery, asset disposition. And in many cases, you've seen equipment, it's piling up in your operating rooms and your materials management offices, your sterile processing department. It's everywhere. It's taking up space. And what do we need the most? It's space, Melanie.
You are absolutely right. And honestly, before I started working on Ashley's expert series, because she talks about this in her expert series as well, I didn't really know a lot about asset management or how that really applied. And then I got to reading it and I'm realizing we're talking about really taking care of our old equipment and getting more space back. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. We need this. I'm really excited to dive deeper into this topic because it applies not only to the OR, but to our entire hospital and can really give us money back, increase our revenue, and get rid of this equipment that's sitting around doing nothing.
So stay with us all the way to the end because Melanie's got a really great story to help us tie this all up in a bow. But absolutely tune in to Curtis and Ashley coming up next. They're going to tell you how to turn all of this unused old equipment into new revenue for your facilities.
A production of 17 Studios, you're listening to Power Supply.
We are here speaking with Curtis McIntyre, founder and CEO, along with Ashley Jackson, VP of Business Development with Masry. And Ashley, if you are following the First Case brand very closely, is one of the experts on our expert series. So while you may have seen her face, you might not have heard her speak, and you'll get that opportunity today. I want to welcome you both to First Case and the Spotlight. And we'll start with you, Curtis. Thanks for coming on the show. Maybe tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it. My background is all healthcare supply chain. So just been in healthcare supply chain from the beginning. Started really as an analyst, I was doing finance and numbers and everything else, and always been very techie and got into developing software probably 15 years ago. And Masry really was, really came out of a need that, the health system I worked for at Intermountain Healthcare, really came about. So, but it's a little bit about my background.
Well, I'm sure we have a few people in common, and we're going to have to get you on the Power Supply podcast as well to talk about all of that to our supply chain audience on that sister podcast of ours. So would love to have you on.
That'd be great.
Ashley, kind of coming over to you. You've got extensive experience on the front lines in healthcare as well, and would absolutely love for you to tell everybody about yourself and maybe even talk about some of the topics that you're discussing on the expert series.
Sure. So first of all, I want to thank you guys for having us here today. Very excited to get to talk to you. So my background is in biomedical engineering. So I worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And I was in biomed for all that time. And while I was within biomed, I started thinking about a lot of different processes and got really program driven. And that's actually how I met up with Curtis, because we were looking at putting together an asset management program. So that kind of spurred the topic for the expert series. What we're going through for the expert series is really from the idea of what kind of medical equipment you want to buy to disposition, asset disposition. So all the way through the asset life cycle. So there's multiple articles that kind of follow different parts in that process.
Yeah, I'm excited to take a deep dive with the both of you during our conversation today, because when I first left nursing and went into sales, one of the companies I worked for was a service organization, and we used to always call where this equipment goes the graveyard. And I think you've got a different term for that, and it'll be great to share some stories about that. But I'm sure Melanie's seen it. Equipment just piles up in hospitals. A lot of times there's no time or understanding about what to do with that. And we're going to talk a lot about that today.
Yeah, and really no space either, right? Like you look at most hospitals and they're so tight on space and limited, and then you get this equipment that you're like, we just need it out the door. And so you get a lot of, of people in the hospital are just like, just get it out. And so the equipment like literally grows legs. Somebody took it somewhere, but nobody knows where it went, right? So, yeah.
Well, this has been an obvious area of need to help hospitals for a long, long time, at least from my standpoint. And Melanie, I'm sure, you're very familiar with this issue, and it takes up space. And as health systems continue to expand services, even try to find space for robotics, those procedures to be performed, it takes up more space. So they're always looking for that. But how did the company come about, Curtis? Obviously you identified this need and then kind of ran with it, but how did that all evolve?
Yeah, well, when I was at Intermountain Healthcare, I started, as I mentioned, I started like building different software and technology that I did on my own time and my own money and was just building. And Intermountain actually started using some of my software. So Intermountain Healthcare was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Let's use this. And then they came to me one day and they're like, hey, Curtis, like we need help with our used equipment that we're trying to get out the door. And we need a better way to sell it. Because they didn't want to just give it away, right? They're like, this is valuable equipment. We shouldn't just give it away. They didn't want to throw it away because that doesn't make any sense. And then, but at the same time, they had an issue with, it's like somebody comes to the dock of the hospital, says, do you have some equipment? They're like, sure. And they're like, hey, we'll give you $500 for it. Sure. Okay. Here's $500. And then where's that $500 going? Is it going back to the, and was it worth 500? So how are you determining all of that? And so, they said, and they wanted to make sure they had a fair process for anybody who wanted to buy their equipment had an equal opportunity to purchase it. Because they didn't want anything to come back as like that there's kickbacks going on or anything along those lines. So they were trying to solve that. And then the other part was just a full audit trail, because they said, like, as I was saying before, you got this equipment that just grows legs, and they're like, we don't know where it went. It's still on the books, but I don't know where it is in the hospital, so like I need an audit trail for when that equipment comes in the door, it does its life. And then when it leaves, I want to know where it went, who bought it or whatever, what did we do with it? And so they came to me and they said, hey, could you build us something to better manage this? And I said, sure. And so that's how I got into the space and building an auction platform. Like you think, this is pretty easy. It shouldn't be too bad. And, it's like, there's a lot to it, right? There's a lot to do it, but we built the auction platform. Intermountain started using it. And then it really just grew from there. Other health systems and IDNs. And, now we have warehouses and trucks, and we provide service, and we'll pick up the equipment for the hospitals and bring it back to our warehouse, and we'll list it for them. We have a redeployment, we'll get into it, but we do redeployment because really our mission of this whole thing is that 0 pieces of medical equipment end up in a landfill. Like it should not happen. Yeah, and it happens all the time. It shouldn't happen. And I've got stories to tell, but we can.
Well, we'll definitely get into those stories. And I'm just even thinking, I don't know that, especially when I was working as a nurse, that I would have any idea that it would be so complicated to disposition that equipment when we weren't using it anymore. I can see why it winds up in a landfill. Nobody has time to manage
just
that
easier
whole process. Yeah, it's just easier.
Yeah, well, it's crazy because most hospitals, they don't have an asset disposition program. So a lot of we'll talk to clients or potential clients all the time where we mention asset disposition and they'll kind of look at us with a deer in the headlights look of they don't even know what we're talking about. It's not uncommon for hospitals not to have a plan in place and an asset disposition program in place. And so what that leads to is a lot of forgotten about equipment, pushed into nooks and crannies in the hospital until it bothers someone and then grows legs, like Curtis said.
Well, I think some of that actually has to do with the fact that, like you said, we just don't know. I mean, no, we don't know what to do with it. Back in earlier part of my career, I was managing an operating room, and our OR, actually our entire hospital moved. We moved from one facility to the other. And in the process of moving, we had warehouses that we were putting equipment in. And I'm going through this warehouse and there's stuff in there that was older than me. And I'm not young, but that equipment was old. And I'm asking, I'm like, what are we doing with this? Why do we have it here? And my director made some comment about, well, maybe there's some way we could donate it to another country to use or something. But I don't really know. And that was the answer every single time. We don't know. I don't know. And then the most recently, the facility that I was at, if you go up into one of the old hospital towers that they're not using up on the 5th floor, it's like a ghost land. And it's like, it's scary. All the old equipment, all the stuff that's just sitting there. Cause I really think nobody knows what to do with it. It's strange.
It's the land of lost toys there. Yeah, we used to call the warehouse that, because we would have this warehouse that we would send stuff to that we knew it still, it was still good. It still could be used. But when it went to the warehouse, there was never any plan to retrieve it back. So and you didn't even, a lot of times, depending on how great your warehouse is. I mean, we didn't have an inventory list to work off of even letting anybody know that it was there. So essentially what we were doing was paying for rent for equipment to depreciate.
Right.
Which is just money on the table. It's crazy. And it just compounds.
I would never even have thought of that, to be honest with you. Like the way you just described that, paying for equipment to depreciate, especially the financial strains that healthcare is under. And a lot of times, think about the OR wanting to have new equipment or wanting to upgrade. And where do we find those funds? It's getting tighter and tighter with case delays and back orders on all kinds of supplies, really impacting the profitability of the OR. We almost have to really scratch and claw to find the funds to upgrade equipment or develop new services in our hospitals.
I'll also chime in, speaking OR specific, that space is at so much of a premium that we don't have enough room. And when you have the corners of your equipment room being filled up with old equipment, or you have stuff just sitting there, it's frustrating because in the morning when I'm trying to get my room ready and I'm trying to pull out equipment and I'm dragging it around old stuff that's just in the way, I'm frustrated. And then the more we see old equipment sitting there, not doing anything, not serving us any purpose, but we know that equipment was expensive and we know that they spent a lot of money on it, but now it's just sitting there doing nothing. Then you're like, that doesn't really just seem like the best use of our money here. Why is it sitting here just taking up space, not being used? So it does add to a lot of frustration in our department when we just have stuff sitting there.
Yeah, the OR can sometimes almost be the worst because of the fact that you do have an equipment room.
Yeah.
So what happens is that people don't have to think about it until there's somebody that goes in, it's usually a superior, goes in there and they have to actually go through the equipment and figure out what they're going to take out for the case. And then that's the day that they're like, no, we need to do something about this. It all needs to leave by tomorrow.
Yeah. Or inventory
and
day.
That's right. That's where you get equipment ending up in the landfill because you've got, that's the only way to get rid of it so quickly. I mean, or you're putting it again into the warehouse that, nobody knows what's in there.
I feel like the OR owns the equipment, so to speak, but doesn't really own this part of the process. Like definitely not in the wheelhouse, even of an OR business manager, to be honest with you. Like it might be one thing. We know nurses are not at all trained in this area, but even the OR business managers don't really address this. It's more of the day-to-day functioning and profitability and operations of the OR. So if the OR doesn't own it, but they have to live with it, who are their partners? Who does own this? Is there somebody that they're just not aware of in the hospital that does own the process today?
I think Ashley kind of mentioned it a little bit before, is so many of these health systems don't have an asset disposition program. Like they're like, that's just not a resource we're going to invest in or anything we're going to spend our time in. And that's why these problems pile up and the equipment piles up, is because, they just haven't set that up. And so as we're talking with a lot of health systems, that is very much kind of the common discussion. Like, what's your asset disposition program? It's like, what is that? Don't really have one.
Well, and that's like you mentioned, Justin. I mean, the lack of ownership, that's you hit the nail on the head. That's the biggest issue that we run into, is that, you have the OR, or you have radiology, or you have lab medicine. I mean, it's kind of universal, but you have these departments that really are managing the equipment, but they're not responsible for this piece, nor should they have to be responsible for this piece, right? I mean, they have a say in it, but they're probably not the people that really should be responsible. But what we found is that there's sometimes nobody responsible. So there's no staff really assigned to asset management or disposition. Typically, it'll be some sort of shared ownership between supply chain, biomed, and the department. But what happens is if you have a disconnect between those departments, then that's where equipment tends to fall through the cracks.
So I mentioned Intermountain Healthcare. I mean, they have their own warehouse. They have trucks. They have two resources that are assigned to just asset disposition. And so when they have a really nice process that when any equipment hits its, end of life, everybody knows you follow this process. It'll get picked up by the truck. They bring it to their warehouse. Their team will list it. First, they list it for redeployment to the website, see if any of the other hospitals within the health system can use it. If nobody wants it for redeployment, then it automatically drops to the auction site, where then bidders around the world can bid on it and they can sell it. And if it doesn't sell, then they have a recycling process, right? So everything either gets redeployed, resold, or recycled, and nothing ends up in a landfill. But not everybody is like an Intermountain, where they have a warehouse and they have the trucks and they have the resources that can do it. One of our clients is Providence St. Joseph Health, and, they have 55 hospitals, across many different states. It just doesn't make sense for them to try and, have a warehouse and all this. And for them to put resources into it, they just were like, hey, Masri, can you help us here? And we said, for sure. So in that scenario, we actually go and act as that resource for them. So we schedule pickups, every other month. Every one of their hospitals gets a pickup from us. We bring it to our warehouse. We list it for them and do all that. And it goes through the same process: redeployment, resell, recycle. And we do the same thing. But we did that because we recognize not every health system is like, look, we don't have the people, we don't have the space, we don't have the trucks to be able to do this. And so that's really where we've kind of expanded our service to support that.
But, you keep talking about the website, and, I know you have this technology background, but we haven't really talked about that. But, you were just describing this, essentially this service that you're offering to Providence, because they might be structured different, but both of the healthcare organizations that you've talked about are very large scale. So I'm assuming that the equipment is also large scale, not something that somebody's just going to manage on a spreadsheet, which is why the technology part is so important. How much does that cost a health system to pay for the technology? Is it less than the cost of an FTE? How does that work?
No, well, I mean, the cool thing about the way we structure everything is we just do, well, it kind of depends, but most of it is we do a commission off of what we sell. So we go pick it up and do everything, and then we collect a commission. So the hospital never has to send us a check. They never have to write us a check. We're actually sending them funds. Without naming names, like one health system we just sent a check to last quarter was $700,000, right? And we're sending them checks, and then we just collect our fee for doing the service. So we're doing pickups and all of this stuff, and then sending them money. And now they're getting money for that equipment, and it's, getting used in the right place instead of, going to a landfill.
So the hospital's out no money and actually identifies a new source of revenue.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And that it's money they were never really collecting before. I mean, go ask any health system that doesn't really have a program like this and say, how much did you get for all the used equipment you sold last year? They'd be like, couldn't tell you, but every one of our clients, like, they have reports, they know exactly how much money they're getting. And it's a lot of money that's going straight to the bottom line because it's money they weren't getting before. So, if you're adding you're adding some millions right to the bottom line with a good program.
Okay, so think about this, because capital budgets are big in the operating room and we use so much equipment and we have so many new things that we buy. If you got $700,000 coming back that you could take and then put back into your capital budget forecasting or in your planning, suddenly that robot that you need to buy, or suddenly that new HANA table or that new Jackson table or any of the huge equipment suddenly becomes a lot more realistic because you have incoming funds to provide that. And that's huge.
Yeah. It's a lot more manageable when you actually have a new revenue stream for equipment that was just taking up space anyway.
And you're getting your space back, right? You're getting space and revenue. That's just the definition of efficiency.
Yeah, I got a space story for you. So we were doing when we first brought on a new client and they had us, they're like, so we're coming to do pickups. And when we were doing our first pickups, of course, they had stuff that had just been piling up for years and years and years. And a lot of it picked over because you got, like these random guys that show up at the hospital and they're like, hey, they just want that one thing in it, like the diamond in the rough. They're like, I want that. And they'll buy the nice thing and leave all the junk, right? And the junk just piles up.
They'll come with a stack of cash, right, Chris?
Yeah, or maybe $10. I don't know. Yeah.
No audit trail for sure.
Absolutely not. And so you get that and you get all this equipment piles up. So we were at this one hospital. They had, this big room, like everybody had. There's a big room that was just full of equipment piling up. Our team cleans it all out. We load up the trucks, even though most of it had to just be recycled, right? A lot of it was not anything so old and you're not going to do anything with it. But we clean it up and, our guys were like sweeping the floor, right? When we were wrapping up, like sweeping the floor. And one of the biomed guys came in, gave our guy a hug and said, I haven't seen this floor in 15 years.
So. Ashley, you just talked about the audit trail, and I'm just remembering, Curtis, what you mentioned at the very beginning about all those concerns that never would have occurred to me as a nurse, that in terms of like, where does this equipment go, or why isn't it just easy to sell? But I can tell you also, when I was doing service sales and it was around medical devices, every once in a while I would be repairing an instrument and we would get the serial number would pop up and somebody would say, this isn't your scope. This doesn't belong to you. And the hospital then had to sort of show how they acquired it. And it did cause, a bit of a problem. And I'm assuming that the audit trail is, a lot of it's financial, but there is just a transfer of ownership component there that would really help hospitals whenever they run into that scenario feel very confident that they can respond to those kinds of, wait, that was reported stolen or anything like that would come up, especially if they're upgrading with pre-owned equipment. That's kind of always been a huge cost savings opportunity, but one of the concerns for many healthcare organizations. Am I kind of nailing it with my prior experience there?
Yes. When you think about, because every time, with every piece of equipment, there's a serial number, there's a model number, and it can be tracked. So to your point, if anything ever came back to the hospital, like, this is yours or it was like, no, we sold it, and I can show you, we sold it on this date to this person, to this and that's when our liability for this thing ended, right? Like there's that type of audit trail that you need. The other part is like, what's happening to it? How much did it sell for? Who got the money? Like, because I've heard many stories and I've also been close to one particular story where this was actually a client of ours that they were, they're using Masri to sell their stuff and everything else. And one of our guys on our team, he noticed a piece of equipment on eBay and he's like, that's this hospital's why is it on eBay? Like, what's it doing on eBay? And like, he picked it up. He knew that this was from, one of our client hospitals. And so I reached out to not the person who was kind of managing the process, right? I reached out to his boss. I said, hey, can we look into this? Cause I think one of your pieces of equipment is actually on eBay. And he looked at it. He's like, that is ours. and it was being sold by somebody else. They didn't know who the seller was. This name didn't, and then we went through that seller's profile on eBay, and they had a lot of this customer's equipment. And they're like, how are they getting this? And so they did a big audit and found out that one of their guys had a relationship with somebody who was coming to essentially the back door of the hospital, give him cash, and he was handing him the equipment. And then he was pocketing the cash. And so it was a big scandal, of course. And, I mean, they could have, and they asked how long it had been going on, and they determined at least for 5 years he had been doing that and just collecting cash. So.
And another issue that I've seen is really with donations. So you've got to be careful with donations sometimes, because you'll say, so hospitals will donate their equipment, but then that equipment is going to people that are actually reselling that equipment. And so you've written it off as donated, and you don't really know what's happened to it. And then you see it, on eBay or on the market again, and you're not receiving any of those funds. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, there are a lot of quote unquote charity organizations posing as charity organizations, but not really, right? They're turning around and selling, and they might say, oh, it's for South America, but they're going to South America and selling it. And they're not giving it to anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I really thought that equipment, when it was donated to another country, was just given to a hospital that needed it. And you're telling me that's not really the case. And that's a little upsetting to me.
It depends on there are some great organizations out there, and we work with some too, that we know that, there's certain things that they don't really do well in the auction market, but they are still can have a lot of use, like wheelchairs, for example. Like, we've got a group that we work with that when we get wheelchairs in, we donate them to this group, and they get them to people who need wheelchairs, and they provide them for free and, all that stuff. And I love that they go there, because selling a wheelchair on our site for $20 or something, it's like, no, give it, let's get it over to where it can just be given to people who need wheelchairs.
Well, that's really hitting a sweet spot for you, Melanie, because don't you have a mission coming up?
I do. I'm going to be in Honduras in December. So just thinking about doing surgery in other countries and the equipment that they so desperately need kind of, just sits with me very importantly right now, I guess.
So as you talk about maybe different companies that have helped, disposition equipment before, you're obviously very unique in the marketplace. I haven't heard of a company that quite does all the things that you do, but if somebody out there has kind of relied on a company to do it before, are they always getting rid of all of their equipment? Are they getting rid of some of their equipment? Like, I know in talking with you all, like, you're going to come get everything out of there. They are really going to reclaim all the space. But what experience might another hospital have had with somebody else? And why is it important to you that you do clear out all that inventory?
So it ranges from having one device that you need to get rid of, or you need to sell, or you need to donate or recycle, to I have a warehouse full of equipment that every month needs to be picked up, and it's going to keep accumulating. We also have situations where clients will have a bulk purchase. So they'll be switching over from, striker beds to Hill-Rom beds, or whatever the case may be. And so we'll help facilitate that project. So really the requests kind of come in all different shapes and sizes. And so because of that, we really pride ourselves on having a platform that's kind of flexible to deal with any cases that the hospitals might have, or the health systems might have. So we have a self-service portal that hospitals can list themselves. Like Curtis mentioned, if you have a centralized warehouse like Intermountain, you're getting all of the equipment kind of in one place, and you have staff that can be dedicated to listing the equipment and really facilitating the buyer pickups, then that's kind of ideal, because any one-off piece of equipment really can go kind of in that category. We also have a ship to service where if you're in need for space, like we mentioned earlier, Melanie, and you just have maybe one or two pieces of equipment that you just need to go today, you can ship it to us, and we will list that for you so that you can get that sold, and you won't have to worry about really the storage fees. The full service is really what we've been talking about the most, which is where we really go into the hospital. We go into the health system. We analyze the program and what they need. And we really work hand in hand with them to come up with a program that really benefits both parties and speaks to the needs of the hospital. So if they have, a large influx of equipment where we're going to need to do, monthly pickups, then we can facilitate that. If they're really only going to need pickups, once or twice a year, and then sometimes ad hoc, then we can kind of work with that too. So really, we pride ourselves on being flexible and being able to really work with the client to figure out what best fits their situation.
So how soon, say a client calls you, they really do need something gone ASAP. How soon can you help them get rid of that equipment?
As soon as our drivers can get out there.
Yeah, it's schedules, right? There's coordinating schedules. And we've had that situation come up, from time to time where it's like, oh my gosh, we got to get this out of here. The fire marshal's coming,
Yep.
like things like that. And we got to clear the hallways. And so, we really want to be a partner of the health system and take care of them the best we can, right? And really be an extension of their team, because we know they're, limited on resources, they're limited on space, they're limited on time. And that's what our job is, to help with all that.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really taking on that full services. We're experienced in the logistics in terms of asset recovery. We're going to do it because we'll essentially be a centers of excellence for you in this category. And you also have the connections with the buyer network, which the hospitals don't have. And you're able to wrap it all up. So they might have some that are donations. There might be some things that they were considering trading in. And you give them just a one-stop shop to handle all those different scenarios. And Ashley, you mentioned the customer dashboard. So they're able to have visibility to all of that, even the different types of things that they're doing, donation versus using the buyer network versus maybe redeploying an asset within their own.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a huge data analytics nerd. Comes from my engineering background. I really love all the dashboards that we've created and really how much you can drill in. But so we have real-time customer dashboards where they can see at any time, what equipment they have that's in redeployment, what equipment they have that's going up for auction, or what equipment is sold and ultimately recycled or donated if we go that option.
Okay, so you actually just hit on another topic that's I'm just dying to know more about, because sustainability, obviously all of this falls into the heading of sustainability by all means. But I'm curious about the recycling aspect of it. If you can't sell it, if you can't donate it, if you can't reuse it, how does this equipment get recycled so that it doesn't end up in a landfill?
We go through that exact process for most equipment, right? First thing is try and redeploy it. If it can't be redeployed, we try and sell it. And if it can't sell, so usually it'll go through a few rounds of auctions. And a lot of, like our general, we'll start a minimum bid of $25 for most items, right? So like if it's not selling at $25, then, and we've gone through a couple rounds of auction, then that's a signal to us. Let's recycle it. And we work with recyclers who, certified recyclers who are taking that metal. And, it's actually super. I've gone to some of these recycling facilities. They're incredible what they're doing with this equipment and then how they're able to separate the different types of materials. So that's really what we do is if it doesn't go through, if it goes through all those things and doesn't sell, then that's a signal to us. All right, recycle it. There are some items though, like we bring it off the truck and we're like, yeah, that needs to go straight to recycling. Nobody's going to buy this. There's those we know, right? They're just not going to, they won't sell. Yeah.
But it's nice though. I mean, the good thing about working with us is that you're getting that experience too. So we know what's not going to sell or what's going to sell. We can kind of make some of those decisions and work directly with you. Another thing that we have done in the past is if it's outside of a normal pickup schedule, or maybe a customer doesn't have a normal pickup schedule worked out with us, is we'll work with them to find a local recycler that will be able to facilitate that pickup, or really just make sure that the equipment is recycled appropriately.
Trade-ins kind of came in. So I was just thinking about it for a second and this is maybe a message to anybody listening that gets involved with buying new equipment. If you buy new equipment, a lot of times the vendor is going to offer you a trade-in for the old equipment. They'll hide their discounts in a trade-in. It's just it's a tactic that they do. And this is coming, my whole world was negotiating with manufacturers. And so one thing that I would suggest is first get a quote for the new equipment without the trade-in. So say, I'm going to buy this and it's going to be $80,000. Okay. All right. Now give me a second quote with the trade-in. So now you're really getting the true value of what are they giving you the trade-in offer for. And so maybe they're like, all right, well, it'll be 70,000. Okay. You're valuing my old equipment at 10,000. Okay. Got it. Now send it over to us and our team. And we have a lot of data. As Ashley mentioned, we're data geeks. Everybody over here is data people. And so we have really cool tools where we can evaluate what do we think the value of that equipment is. And we might come in and say, hey, 10,000 is a great offer. I would take the trade in. That's great. I would definitely do it. Or we might look at it and go, no, I see this stuff. It's selling for 25 grand on the market right now. So don't take the trade in and let's go a different route and we'll help you with that and we'll help you get it sold. But that's just one of the things that came to mind as we were just talking through, as trade-ins came up. And we've done that. A lot of our clients, we'll get emails almost every week and we'll evaluate a trade-in offer and say, yep, take the trade-in. That looks good. Or no, here's another route. And, one client in particular, they did a whole scope replacement for across system wide. They got a trade-in for the scopes. And we came in and we're like, yeah, we think we can do better. And in fact, we've done, I don't know how much, Ashley, better than what the trade-in, but it's in the tunes of over $1 million.
As of right now, we've done $700K over the trade-in and $1.9 million
total sales
in new recovered revenue. Total sales.
Yeah, this is going to be bonus content. It's a white paper. So if you're listening and you want to see them actually put that in writing, not just say it, go ahead and download the First Case smartphone app for iPhone or Android. Open this episode up, click the gift box, and it will actually have the white paper in a PDF format for you to review this success story. What I didn't understand about that, though, Ashley, is that project's not even done. That's where you're at
it's ongoing.
So far. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so far.
So, Curtis, you described a consultative approach, and I want to point out one thing about that I really love that we didn't just say straight out. Hospitals' data is really limited to their experience or their prior experience. Having a partner like you who understands true market value outside of maybe how they've valued it or how another partner has valued it for them in the past is not really giving them a broad view of what they could recover in terms of these assets. And, I think having that database and having those analytics, I had to emphasize that because I just think that's a lot of the magic in the model, in the way that you consult and provide customer service to your customers.
Yeah, we have a really cool internal tool. It's called our value estimator tool, and we can put in model numbers and then it'll tell us all the statistics on every time we've sold one of those. What's the min bid? What's the max bid? What's the median? What's the average? And we can kind of filter through those and really get a good idea of, okay, this is what your market value is for something like this. And having data, is, I always like to say, you really can't optimize what you can't see. And so if you really can see this stuff, you can go after it and make it better.
All right. So I have to ask you this. It's probably the last question or close to the last question, but where did the name come from? How did you come up with Masri?
Well, honestly, it was, if you kind of think of like, just healthcare in general, particularly the healthcare supply chain and in healthcare equipment, it's a bit of a maze, right? Like everything is a mess. Like we talked about, you're going through a maze of trying to get your equipment out of the equipment room or whatever else, or even just a maze of anything else. And it's kind of a mess. And so, and then free. So maze free. So Masri is how the name came together. Yeah. Make things maze free.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I like that. Maze free, especially again, you talk about that logistics, that secondary market, or just figuring out how to do the allocation and the disposition of these assets. It's even more of a maze because it's not in healthcare sweet spot, which is probably why most organizations don't have a program in place today. They can learn more. They can find you on the web, www.mazri.com. I'm going to spell that out, Mazre. and you can also find them on LinkedIn. If you go to the First Case page and you're following us on LinkedIn, you'll see Ashley's Expert Series posts every single month. Reach out to Curtis or Ashley on LinkedIn as well. Connect with them. The email's info@masri.com, or you can call them directly, 866-512-5533. Ashley, I'm going to start with you as we kind of wrap. I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really engaging discussion, and I love all the stories that you have to tell about the positive experiences that you've had and the value that you've brought to the table. But is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up, Ashley?
I just want to thank you guys for having us on here today. You know, obviously Curtis and I are very passionate about this. We both come from the healthcare side, so we know firsthand kind of the maze that you can kind of go through in dealing with some of these things. So really, the reason why I'm very happy that I'm at Masri now is because this is the program that I wish that I had when I was on the healthcare side. So it's really nice to kind of be part of the solution to a lot of the problems that I've seen.
Curtis, I'm not surprised that you've been having success, because the best innovations come from solving a real world problem, not an idea about a real world problem. And so, I just want to commend you on that. And thank you for coming on. But anything that you feel like maybe we didn't cover that should be said before we
No, I mean, thank you. It's been awesome being here. I think, the thing we've talked about data, we've talked about technology, we've talked about service. And I think it's really a combination of those things. You provide good service, you provide good tools and data and technology, and you can drive real good value for health systems, right? Because it gets pretty complex out there. And if you can find vendor partners that can really help simplify things, that's what we're here for.
Was Curtis McIntyre, founder and CEO, along with Ashley Jackson, VP of Business Development with Masri. And as I've mentioned several times, mostly because it's one of my favorite expert series, is Ashley's Expert Series on First Case. Just great information every single month. And Melanie, you can really tell that they both worked on the front lines. Like Curtis's stories, Ashley's understanding of where the value really meets the needs of healthcare organizations. And then you kind of, after we wrapped, told me this really intriguing story that relates very much to our conversation. I don't know if you want to tell it as we're wrapping up today.
Yeah, sure. So the OR is full of equipment. It always is. It's the bane of our existence, how much equipment we have. But different departments maybe solve that problem differently. When like Joint Commission shows up or something, then you have to clean out the hallways. You've got to make it all look like you're obeying all the rules. And one particular facility, every time Joint Commission would come or the fire marshal would come, they would rent 18-wheelers, and they would load these 18-wheelers up with all of the extra equipment. And while they were being inspected, those 18-wheelers were driving around the city, keeping all that equipment out of sight. And then as soon as the inspectors left, the equipment would come right back. And so it just goes to show you how much equipment we have and that we need to be doing something else with it. And if we can get rid of the extra old equipment that's just collecting dust and taking up space, then we need to do it, because we don't really need to be hiding it in 18-wheelers when we're being inspected.
Yeah. When you talk about equipment filling up several 18-wheelers, it's not hard to believe what you're going to see in the white paper. When you think about multiple 18-wheelers, it's not hard to believe that there might be $1.9 million in new or recovered revenue by, instead of driving it around and putting it back until the next Joint Commission inspection, actually turning it into revenue. And they did mention that, obviously they beat the trade-in. So they beat the trade-in by 700,000. So it's 1.9 million in new or recovered revenue. They might have been able to go somewhere else, but they got an additional 700. And like you said, Melanie, what kinds of upgrades, equipment, just financial stability, for the healthcare organization would 700,000, do for you? Quite a bit. So just want to remind everybody, Masri.com, MAZREE.com. Find Curtis or Ashley on LinkedIn, connect with them, but definitely follow Masri on LinkedIn. And if you need to reach out to them directly by email, it's info@masri.com. That's MAZREE.com, or call them directly 866-512-5533. And that's going to do it for this vendor spotlight. I do want to remind everybody once again, download our smartphone app if you haven't downloaded ours already, or if you're listening to lots of different podcasts, which we certainly hope you are. And make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook. On behalf of Melanie and myself, thank you for listening to this vendor spotlight.